Clara Whitmore pressed her hand flat against the frosted train window and watched Red Hollow, Colorado shrink into the distance, then stopped herself. She wasn't leaving. Not this time. She picked up both suitcases, squared her shoulders, and walked off that train into the coldest January wind she had ever felt. Behind her, she heard the first laugh. Then a second. A woman's voice carried clear as a gunshot across the platform. "Lord have mercy, Ethan Callahan hired that." Clara didn't flinch. She had been surviving cruel words her entire life. She just kept walking. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel right now, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The morning Clara Whitmore arrived in Red Hollow, Colorado, the temperature sat at 11 degrees below zero, and the entire town came out to watch her fail. Not because they had been invited, not because they cared about her, but because word had spread fast in a small town, and the word was this: Ethan Callahan, the quiet, solitary blacksmith at the edge of Red Hollow, had hired himself a woman from back east, and she was due on the 9 o'clock train. People had been talking about it for 2 weeks. The women at the dry goods store said it was desperate. The men outside the saloon said it wouldn't last a month. Old Margaret Hines, who had opinions about everything and kept none of them to herself, had announced at Sunday service that a man of Ethan's standing, hard-working, skilled, honest, deserved better than importing some stranger to run his household. Nobody argued with Margaret. Nobody ever did. So when that train screamed into the Red Hollow station and the doors swung open and Clara Whitmore stepped down onto the platform, the crowd got exactly what it had gathered for: something to talk about. Clara was 29 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and close to 300 pounds. She wore a dark wool coat that had been mended twice at the elbows, carried one suitcase in each hand, and did not look around the platform the way nervous women did, searching for a friendly face, hoping for reassurance. She just stepped off that train, planted both feet on solid ground, and stood still for exactly 2 seconds. Like she was taking inventory, like she was deciding whether this place was worth her time. That was the first thing that surprised people. They had expected timid. They had expected apologetic. They had expected a woman who knew she was already being judged and who bent herself into shapes trying to soften that judgment. They did not expect someone who looked like she was sizing them up right back. Then the first laugh came. It was a man near the luggage cart, a rancher named Dale Pitts, who had never once in his 53 years kept a thought inside his head when he could say it out loud instead. "Good Lord," Dale said loud enough for the whole platform to hear. "She's gonna eat Ethan out of house and home before February." A few people laughed. Not all of them, but enough. A woman near the station door turned to the woman beside her and whispered something that ended with the words "not suitable," and both of them pressed their lips together in that particular way that wasn't quite a smile, but was close enough to one to hurt. Clara heard it. She heard all of it. Her jaw tightened, just barely, just enough for someone watching close to notice. But she didn't stop walking. She crossed the platform with both suitcases in hand, her boots loud and steady on the frozen wood planks, and she scanned the crowd the way you scan a crowd when you are looking for one specific face, and you intend to find it. She found Ethan Callahan standing at the far edge of the platform, slightly apart from everyone else. He was taller than she expected, broad through the shoulders with calloused hands and the kind of permanent squint that came from spending your life working around fire. His coat was clean but plain. His hat was pulled down against the wind. He wasn't smiling, but he also wasn't laughing. He was just standing there watching her cross the platform, and his expression was something she couldn't quite read. Not warmth exactly, not suspicion either. Something more like patience. Like a man who had decided to wait and see before he formed any conclusions. That alone set him apart from every other person on that platform. Clara stopped in front of him, set both suitcases down, looked him square in the face. "Mr. Callahan," she said. "Miss Whitmore," he said. Neither of them reached out a hand to shake. The cold was too sharp for that kind of formality. He looked at her for a moment, not the way the crowd looked at her, not scanning her size and finding her wanting. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone he is genuinely trying to understand. Then he said, "You made it all the way here." "I did?" Clara said. "How was the journey?" "Long," she said. "Cold." The heating car broke down somewhere outside of Denver. "I ate the last of my biscuits yesterday morning, and the dining car was too expensive." She paused. "I'm hungry and I'm tired, and I'd appreciate it if we could get wherever we're going." Something shifted in Ethan's face. It wasn't a smile exactly. It was more like the beginning of one that he had decided to hold back. "Fair enough," he said. He reached down and took both her suitcases before she could object. She opened her mouth to tell him she was perfectly capable of carrying her own luggage. She had been doing exactly that for 29 years, but something in the simple, unhesitating way he did it stopped her. He wasn't taking the bags because he thought she was weak. He was just taking them. She followed him off the platform and through the crowd, and she felt every eye on her back, heard the murmurs trailing behind her like smoke, and she kept her chin level and her stride steady, and she did not look at any of them. She had learned a long time ago that looking back only gave people the satisfaction of knowing they had landed their shot. The wagon was waiting at the edge of the road. Ethan loaded her suitcases into the back without comment, then moved to help her up to the seat. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. This was always the moment people made it awkward, offered help in a way that turned into performance, made a show of assisting the fat woman, but Ethan simply offered his hand steady and matter-of-fact, and when she took it, he helped her up cleanly without making it a thing. She sat down on the wagon seat and pulled her coat tighter against the wind. Ethan climbed up beside her, took the reins and clicked the horses forward. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Red Hollow scrolled past on either side the general store, the blacksmith's shop, the church, a handful of homes with smoke rising from their chimneys. Clara watched it all without comment. Finally, Ethan said, "I should tell you up front the house is in poor condition. I haven't had time to maintain it properly." "How poor?" Clara said. "The kitchen needs organization, the pantry's low, there's a leak in the back roof that I haven't gotten to, windows need sealing against the cold." He paused. "I'm not a domestic man, Miss Whitmore. I built my life around the forge. The house just happened around me." Clara considered this. "What's in the pantry?" she asked. "Some flour, salt pork, dried beans, coffee, not much else. Any preserves, any root vegetables. Some turnips, maybe some potatoes. I'm not certain. Animals. 2 horses, some chickens, a milk cow." Clara nodded slowly, thinking through it the way she thought through every problem methodically, without panic breaking it into pieces. She could manage one at a time. "I can work with that," she said. Ethan glanced at her sideways. "You're not concerned about the state of it." "Mr. Callahan," Clara said evenly. "I grew up in a house with 6 children and a father who spent most of his wages at the tavern. I have lived in 2 different boarding houses, one of which had a roof that was more hole than shingle by the time I left. I have never once in my life had a home that wasn't in some state of falling apart." She turned to look at him directly. "I am not afraid of a little disrepair." Ethan looked back at the road. After a moment he said, "The position pays $12 a month, room included." "The advertisement said 10. "I revised it." "Why?" He was quiet for a second. "Because I wanted someone who would actually stay," he said. "Figured a fair wage was a better start than a low one." Clara looked at him for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she looked back at the road ahead. $12 is fair," she said. "I'll stay as long as you treat me with decency." "That's all I'm asking for in return," Ethan said. And that was the foundation. Not elegant, not romantic. Just 2 plain people making a plain agreement in the middle of a frozen road, with the wind cutting across the open fields and the horses breathing steam into the January air. They reached the house 20 minutes later. It was exactly as bad as Ethan had described, possibly a little worse. The front porch had a plank that gave badly. When Clara stepped on it, she filed that away immediately, something to fix before someone went through it. The windows were single pane, and the gaps around the frames had been stuffed with old rags that had long since stopped doing the job. The front door stuck when Ethan pushed it open, swollen with moisture and cold, and when they stepped inside, the chill inside the house was only marginally less brutal than the chill outside. Clara stood in the front room and took it in. There was a good fireplace, solid stone, well built. That was something. The furniture was sparse but sturdy. The kitchen was large enough to work in, though the organization of it was bewildering. Pots stacked without order. Dry goods scattered across shelves with no logic to their placement, tools mixed in with cooking implements in a way that made it hard to find anything quickly. She could see what this place must have been once. She could see what it had been allowed to become. She set her jaw and turned around. "First thing," she said, "I need to get a fire going. Second, I need to see exactly what's in the pantry. Third, that porch plank needs to be replaced before dark, or someone's going to put a foot through it." Ethan stared at her. "I've been meaning to get to that plank for 6 months, he said. "Well," Clara said, already moving toward the fireplace to assess the wood situation, "we'll get to it today." Something crossed Ethan's face again, that same not quite a smile. He moved toward the back of the house to find his tools. And just like that, they started. No ceremony, no formal arrangement, no long conversation about expectations or boundaries or feelings. They simply began working together in the same cold house on the same list of problems. And Clara thought, as she stacked wood and assessed the kindling and planned the first meal she would make in this kitchen, that maybe this was the thing she had been missing all along. Not a place that was already warm and welcoming. Not a town that accepted her before they knew her. Not a man who saw her worth before she demonstrated it. Maybe what she had always needed was a starting point. A place where the work needed doing, and nobody was going to tell her she was too big, or too plain, or too difficult to be the one who did it. Maybe what she had needed was exactly this. A broken house, a quiet man, and the chance to build something from the beginning. By the time the sun dropped behind the ridge and the temperature outside fell to something that would freeze exposed skin in minutes, Clara had a fire roaring in every room. With a fireplace, a pot of bean soup on the stove made from what little the pantry offered, and the porch plank replaced with a solid piece of lumber she had found in the shed while Ethan held the lantern. He had watched her work all afternoon without a word. Not the way the crowd on the platform had watched her, looking for failure, looking for proof of what they already believed. He watched the way a man watches something he doesn't fully understand yet, but knows somewhere in the quiet part of himself that he is looking at something real. When she set a bowl of soup in front of him at the kitchen table and poured 2 cups of coffee black, because she hadn't found sugar yet, but she would, Ethan wrapped both hands around the cup and breathed in the steam and said nothing for a long moment. Then, "When did you learn to do all this?" Clara sat down across from him and pulled her own bowl toward her. "I never had the option not to," she said. Ethan nodded slowly, like that answer made complete sense to him. Like maybe it was an answer he recognized. He picked up his spoon. "It's good," he said after the first taste. "It's beans and salt pork," Clara said. "Don't compliment me until I've had a chance to cook something worth complimenting." Ethan's mouth twitched at the corner. "Fair enough," he said. They ate in silence after that. Not the uncomfortable silence of 2 strangers who had nothing to say to each other. The other kind. The kind that settles between people who are both of them more accustomed to being alone than to making conversation, and who find unexpectedly that the quiet is not terrible when there is someone else sitting in it with you. Outside, the wind pushed hard against the newly sealed windows. Inside, the fire held. Clara finished her soup and looked around at the kitchen, at the shelves that still needed organizing, at the list of repairs she had already begun composing in her head, at the work that stretched out in front of her like an open road. She was not afraid of any of it. She had never been afraid of work. What she had been afraid of, though she would not have used that word, would have chosen something harder, something less vulnerable, was arriving somewhere and finding that all the work in the world still wouldn't be enough to make a place for her. That the problem wasn't her effort. That the problem was her. She pushed that thought down where she kept all the other thoughts she couldn't afford and picked up her coffee cup. Tomorrow, she would tackle the pantry. Tomorrow, she would map out every repair this house needed. Tomorrow, she would begin the long, careful work of turning this cold, neglected place into something that deserved to be called a home. But tonight, she sat in a warm kitchen that she had made warm, and she drank coffee that she had made, and across the table from her, a quiet man ate soup she had made from almost nothing, and outside the whole town of Red Hollow was probably already talking about her. Let them talk. She had a job to do. And Clara Whitmore had never once in her life failed to do her job. The wind outside screamed and rattled at the walls. The fire inside answered back steady and sure. And in that small kitchen at the edge of Red Hollow, Colorado, in the iron heart of January 1884, something impossibly small and impossibly important had already quietly begun. The next morning, Clara was awake before the sun. Not because she had slept well, she hadn't. The mattress in the small back room Ethan had given her was thin, and the cold crept through the wall beside her bed, no matter how many times she pulled the quilt tighter. But she had learned years ago that lying in a cold bed, waiting for warmth that wasn't coming, was a waste of the only resource she had that nobody could take from her: time. She was dressed and in the kitchen before the sky outside had shifted from black to gray, and she had the fire rebuilt and water heating before she allowed herself to think about the day ahead. The pantry was the first problem. She had looked at it last night and made a rough count, but now she stood in front of those shelves in the early morning half-dark with a lantern in one hand and a scrap of paper in the other, and she did it properly. Every bag, every tin, every jar. She lifted them, shook them, opened the ones she wasn't sure about, smelled the ones she really wasn't sure about, and wrote everything down in the small, tight handwriting she had developed as a girl when paper was expensive and space was precious. The result was not encouraging. Enough flour for maybe 10 days of baking if she was careful. Salt pork that was borderline not spoiled, but close enough to the edge that she needed to use it fast. Dried beans that were fine. Coffee that was adequate. Cornmeal. A small amount of dried apple. Some salt. Almost no sugar. No pepper. No lard to speak of. No preserves at all, not a single jar, which meant either Ethan had eaten through everything the previous season had produced, or there had been nobody to put anything up in the first place. She suspected the second. She stood there in the pantry doorway holding her list and doing arithmetic in her head. How many meals, how many days, what she could stretch, what she couldn't, and she heard Ethan's boots on the floor behind her. "Coffee's not ready yet," she said without turning around. "I know," he said. "I heard you moving around. Thought I'd see if you needed anything. I need to go to the general store today." A pause. "I can take you after the morning work at the forge." "What time does the forge start?" "Sunup." "What time do you stop for the midday?" "I don't usually." Clara turned around at that, looked at him standing in the kitchen doorway, already dressed, already pulling on his coat over his work clothes, and she said, "You don't eat a midday meal." Ethan's expression suggested this was not a question he had ever considered worth answering. "I eat when there's time," he said. "There's always time," Clara said. "You make time or you fall apart by February. Which is it going to be?" He stared at her. She turned back to the pantry and made another note on her list. "Midday," she said. "I'll have something at the forge for you. That way I don't have to wait for the store." "You don't have to do that," Ethan said. "I know I don't have to," Clara said. "But I'm going to because a man who doesn't eat proper meals makes poor decisions, and the last thing I need is for you to make a poor decision about something structural in this house that I'm then going to have to figure out how to fix." The silence that followed was not offended. It was something closer to startled. "All right," Ethan said finally. "Good," Clara said. "Coffee will be ready in 20 minutes. He left. She heard the front door open and close, heard his boots cross the porch, the new plank holding solid. She noticed with quiet satisfaction, and she turned back to her list and kept working. 20 minutes later, she brought 2 cups of coffee out to the forge. The forge was behind the house, a solid stone structure that radiated heat even from 20 feet away. She could hear the bellows and the first ring of iron on iron before she pushed open the door, and the wave of warmth that hit her face was so sharp after the frozen air outside that she stopped for just a second and breathed it in. Ethan was already working. He didn't stop when she came in, just reached for the coffee cup she held out without looking up from the piece he was shaping, and drank half of it in one long pull. She stood there for a moment watching him work. She had seen blacksmiths before in other towns, but there was something particular about the way Ethan Callahan worked that she found herself noting without meaning to. He was completely unhurried. Every movement deliberate. Every strike of the hammer placed exactly where he intended it, with exactly the force he intended, and she could see in the way the metal responded to him that he understood it. Understood not just the technique, but something more instinctive than technique. He knew what the iron wanted to do, and he worked with it instead of against it. She filed that away and went back inside. The morning moved fast after that. Clara organized the kitchen the way she wanted it. Everything with a logic to its placement. Things used daily at arm height. Things used less often on the high shelves, nothing on the floor. She found a bin of potatoes behind a broken crate in the shed that Ethan had apparently forgotten about, and between those and the beans, and what was left of the salt pork, she had enough to make something real for the midday meal. She repaired 2 chairs that wobbled badly using a small toolkit she found in the shed. She found the source of the roof leak. It was in the back room, not the main part of the house, and it was smaller than she had feared, and she got up on a chair and stuffed the gap with a combination of rags and pine pitch from a tin she found on the highest shelf, and made a note to do it properly once the weather allowed. She found a crate under Ethan's bed with what appeared to be his late wife's sewing things, still inside thread needles, a folded length of calico, a half-finished pillowcase, and she closed it immediately without touching anything, and pushed it back exactly where it had been. That was not hers to sort. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She would wait and see. At midday, she walked back out to the forge with a pot of potato and bean stew and 2 plates, and Ethan came out of the forge and stood in the cold doorway eating standing up, the way she imagined he did everything without ceremony, without pause, focused only on the function of the thing. "This is good," he said. "I told you to wait until I had something worth complimenting," Clara said. "And now you do," he said simply. Like that settled it. She almost smiled. She turned her face away so he wouldn't see. After the midday, she hitched one of the horses to the smaller wagon herself. She had been doing that since she was 12, and had no intention of asking for help with something she was perfectly capable of managing, and drove herself to the general store. The general store in Red Hollow was run by a woman named Harriet Osgood, who was somewhere between 50 and 60 years old, and had the kind of sharp observant face that told you she missed nothing, and forgot nothing, and had an opinion ready on every subject whether you wanted it or not. Harriet watched Clara come through the door, set her basket on the counter, and pull out her list. "You're the woman Ethan Callahan hired," Harriet said. It wasn't a question. "Clara Whitmore," Clara said, and she said it straight and clear without any apology attached to it. "I need to place an order." "Ethan has credit here," Harriet said. "I'm aware. I'll be purchasing on that account until Mr. Callahan and I have a chance to discuss the household budget." Harriet's eyebrows rose slightly. "Purchasing," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am." "How much are you planning to spend?" Clara put her list on the counter and smoothed it flat with her palm. Harriet looked at it. Then she looked at Clara. Then she looked at the list again. "This is a month's worth of supplies," Harriet said. 6 weeks, Clara said. "Closer to 6 if I'm careful, and I'm always careful." "Ethan doesn't usually order this much at once." "I know," Clara said pleasantly. "I saw his pantry." Something shifted in Harriet's face. Not warmth, not yet, but a kind of recalibration, the look of a woman who had expected one thing and was in the process of adjusting to something else. "All right," Harriet said. "I'll need to check some of these for stock." "Take your time," Clara said. While Harriet moved through the shelves, the door to the store opened, and 2 women came in together, The same two women Clara had seen whispering on the platform yesterday morning. She recognized the one on the left immediately, tall, thin, with a gray dress, and a way of holding her chin that made everything she looked at seem slightly beneath her. That was Dorothy Crane, she would later learn. Wife of the town's only lawyer president of the Ladies' Auxiliary, and the closest thing Red Hollow had to a social authority on what was and wasn't acceptable. Dorothy saw Clara at the counter and stopped. "Oh," she said, and then to the woman beside her, in a voice that was just barely not a whisper, "She's already spending his money." Clara did not turn around. She kept her eyes on Harriet's hands moving along the shelves, and she breathed in through her nose, slow and steady, and she kept her voice entirely out of her face. "Mr. Callahan's household requires supplies," she said to no one in particular in a tone that was perfectly even. "That's why he hired me." Dorothy made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "I'm sure that's one reason," she said. Clara turned around then. She turned around slowly, and she looked at Dorothy Crane with the particular expression she had developed over 29 years of being looked at sideways. Not anger, not hurt, not defiance exactly. Something cooler than all of those. Something that said she had heard worse from better people and was not especially impressed. "Mrs.?" Clara said. "Crane," Dorothy said. "Dorothy Crane. My husband is the town attorney." "Mrs. Crane," Clara said. "I came to Red Hollow to do a job. I intend to do it well. I don't intend to cause any trouble, and I don't intend to be the subject of any either." She paused. "I hope we understand each other." Dorothy's eyes narrowed. "I'm sure we do," she said in a tone that meant the opposite. Clara turned back to the counter. Her hands were perfectly still. Inside something burned. Not shame. She had burned most of the shame out of herself years ago, but something hot and tight that she recognized as the particular fury of a woman who had been dismissed so many times that the dismissal itself had become a kind of insult. She refused to stop feeling, because feeling it meant she hadn't accepted it, and she never intended to accept it. She bought everything's on her list. Harriet totaled it without comment, wrote it in the ledger under Ethan's account, and when Clara lifted the first heavy crate to carry it out to the wagon, Harriet came around the counter without being asked and lifted the other one. Clara looked at her. Harriet met her eyes. "My husband had that pantry once," she said quietly. "After I was sick for 3 months the year our youngest was born. I know what a neglected pantry looks like." She said nothing else. She just carried the crate out to the wagon and set it down and went back inside. Clara stood beside the wagon for a moment. She hadn't expected that. She drove home with the supplies and unloaded everything herself and spent the rest of the afternoon putting it away in the order she intended. And when Ethan came in from the forge at dusk, smelling of iron and wood smoke, and stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the shelves full now. Organized, logical. He stood there for so long without speaking that Clara finally said, "Something wrong?" "No," he said. His voice was quiet. "No, nothing's wrong." He sat down at the table, and she brought him a plate and coffee, and sat across from him, and they ate together the way they had the night before. In that silence, that was not uncomfortable, that was becoming. She realized something she was almost looking forward to. But that evening, something happened that the silence couldn't hold. They were nearly finished with their meal when hoofbeats came hard up the road and a fist hit the front door 3 times fast. Ethan was on his feet before the third knock. He opened the door, and a boy of maybe 15 stood on the porch, red-faced and breathing hard snow on his coat horse blowing steam behind him. "Mr. Callahan," the boy said. "It's the Harlow place. Their barn roof, the snow load came down on the east side and took out a section of the loft wall, and they can't get the animals in, and it's 10 below tonight." Ethan already had his coat in his hand. He looked back at Clara just once quick, like he was checking something, and then looked back at the boy. "Tell your father I'm coming." The boy turned and ran. Clara was already at the shelf where she had organized the lanterns that afternoon. She lifted 2 and turned around. "I'm coming with you," she said. Ethan stopped. "It's 10 below," he said. I know what 10 below feels like, Clara said. I walked 3 miles in at once to get a doctor for my youngest brother. She handed him one of the lanterns. Do you have rope, heavy rope? He stared at her for a half second. Shed, he said. South wall. Get it, she said. I'll get the wagon. They were moving before she finished the sentence. The Harlow farm was a mile and a half east of town, and they made it in under 15 minutes with the horses pushed hard through the dark. The damage was worse than the boy had said. A full section of the loft wall had given way under the weight of 3 days of accumulated snow, and the gap it left was wide enough that the cold was pouring through it like water through a broken dam. 4 horses and 6 cattle were standing in the open section of the barn, pressing against each other for warmth, and Nate Harlow, a man of about 40, with 2 sons and a face that showed every one of the hard years he had lived, was standing in the wreckage of the loft wall with a hammer and no clear idea of what to do first. He looked at Ethan with naked relief. Then he looked at Clara, and his expression went uncertain. "This is Miss Whitmore," Ethan said. "She's with me. Tell us what you need." "I don't," Nate started. "Tell us what you need," Ethan said again, and there was something in his voice not command exactly more like steadiness. The kind of steadiness that a panicking man could grab onto, and Nate Harlow grabbed onto it. They worked for 3 hours. Ethan handled the structural repair. He knew materials, knew load-bearing, knew how to improvise with what was on hand in a way that would hold through a night this cold. Clara worked alongside Nate's eldest son, who was 16 and scared, and trying not to show it. Moving the animals into the repaired section, securing the temporary wall bracing from the inside covering the remaining gap with oilcloth they found in the tack room. She had the boy hold things and hand things, and she talked to him quietly the whole time, not coddling, not baby talk, just steady instruction. "This goes here, hold this end, don't let it slip." And she watched the fear drain out of his face as the work gave him somewhere to put his hands. That was the thing about work. It was the best medicine she had ever found for fear. By the time they were finished, the animals were settled, the wall would hold until morning, and Nate Harlow's wife, a small woman named Ruth, who had been trying to manage the 3 younger children inside the farmhouse and clearly hadn't slept since the wall came down, came out to the barn door, wrapped in a shawl, and stopped when she saw what they had done. She looked at Ethan. She looked at Clara. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "Beans," Clara said. Ruth blinked. "I beg your pardon." "If you have dried beans to spare," Clara said, "I could use them. My pantry's short." She paused. "If not, don't worry about it. This is what neighbors do." Ruth stared at her for a second, and then did something Clara had not expected at all. She laughed. Not the cruel laugh from the platform. Not the thin, mean laugh she had been hearing her whole life from people who thought the fact of her was somehow funny. A real laugh surprised, warm the laugh of a woman who had been terrified all evening and had just been given unexpectedly something light to hold on to. "I have beans," Ruth said. "I have more beans than I know what to do with. Come inside, both of you, and warm up before you freeze." They sat in the Harlow kitchen for 20 minutes warming their hands on coffee cups, and Ruth Harlow sat across from Clara and looked at her with an expression that Clara couldn't immediately identify, and then realized after a moment was simply honest curiosity. No judgment in it, no agenda, just a woman looking at another woman and genuinely wondering about her. "Where are you from?" Ruth asked. "Ohio originally," Clara said. "Though I've been a few places since. What brought you out here?" "The advertisement," Clara said. "Mr. Callahan needed someone." "And you came all this way by yourself?" "Yes, ma'am." Ruth looked at her for another moment. "That took nerve," she said quietly. Clara didn't know what to do with that. Compliments of that kind, not about her cooking or her work or her usefulness, but about her as a person, as a woman who made choices, were not something she had received often. "I had few options," she said, because that was true, and it was easier than the full truth. Ruth shook her head slowly. Having few options and having the nerve to take the hard one aren't the same thing, she said. Clara looked down at her coffee. Ethan, sitting across the table, said nothing. But she felt him look at her. On the ride home, the cold was sharper than before, and the sky had gone clear and full of stars, and Clara sat beside Ethan on the wagon seat, with her coat pulled tight, and both of them were quiet for a long time. Then Ethan said, "You didn't have to come tonight." "I know," Clara said. "You could have stayed at the house." "I could have," she agreed. A pause. "Why didn't you?" he asked. Clara thought about it for a moment. Not performing the thought, actually thinking it through. "Because there was a job to do," she said, "and I could help do it, that's all." Ethan was quiet. "The Harlows are good people," he said. "Nate's had a hard few years, lost a son 2 winters back. He doesn't ask for help easily." "I know," Clara said. "I could see that." "He'll remember tonight," Ethan said. "I don't need him to remember it," Clara said. "I know you don't," Ethan said. And there was something in his voice, something careful and genuine and slightly undone that she had not heard before. "That's sort of the thing." She didn't answer that. She didn't know how to, not yet. But she thought about it the rest of the way home, and she was still thinking about it when she was back in her cold room, under the thin quilt, with the wind pressing hard against the wall behind her head. 2 days later, a woman she didn't know knocked on the front door of Ethan's house, and introduced herself as May Sutton from the farm at the north end of the valley, and said she had heard what Clara had done at the Harlow place, and she wondered if it wasn't too much trouble, if Clara might take a look at the problem she was having with her smokehouse, because she thought the meat she had put up for winter might be at risk, and she didn't know enough to tell for certain. Clara told her to come in, and she would look at it. She spent 3 hours at the Sutton farm that afternoon. The smokehouse problem was real, a sealing issue that had allowed moisture in and started working on the preserved meat from the inside, and Clara fixed what she could fix and told May honestly what was too far gone, and helped her calculate what she could still save and plan for the gap it would leave. May Sutton was 53 years old and had been farming this valley for 27 years, and she listened to everything Clara said with complete attention, and when Clara finished, May looked at her and said, "Where did you learn all this?" "From doing it wrong first," Clara said. "Mostly." May laughed. "Aren't you something?" she said, and she meant it as a genuine observation, not a condescension. Clara drove home in the late afternoon light with 2 jars of peach preserves that May had pressed on her, wouldn't hear of Clara refusing them, and she set them on the kitchen shelf where she had designated space for preserves, and she stood there looking at them for a moment. 2 jars. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. That night at supper, Ethan noticed them. "May Sutton," he said. "Yes," Clara said. He picked up his fork. "She doesn't give those to anyone," he said. "She did tonight," Clara said. They ate in silence. But later, when Clara was washing the supper dishes, and Ethan was at the table with a piece of harness leather he was mending, he said without looking up, "You went to the Sutton farm today." "Yes," Clara said. "That's 4 miles in this weather." "Yes." "The horse treated you well." "The horse was fine," Clara said. "Though the left front shoe is getting thin, you might want to look at it." Ethan set down the leather. "I shod that horse 6 weeks ago," he said. "The ground's been hard," Clara said. "I'm not criticizing, I'm just telling you." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Clara." She turned around. He was looking at her from across the kitchen, the lantern light between them, and his expression was something she did not know how to read too much in it. Too many things stacked on top of each other. None of them sharp enough to name individually, but the sum of them hitting somewhere behind her sternum, in a way she was not expecting. "Thank you," he said, "for last night, for today." He paused. "For all of it." Clara looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the dishes. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "I haven't fixed the roof." Behind her so quietly that she almost missed it under the sound of the water, Ethan Callahan laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a social laugh, A real one. Brief, startled, genuine, the laugh of a man who had apparently forgotten that laughter was something he was still capable of. Clara kept her hands in the wash water and let a small smile happen where he couldn't see it. Outside, the temperature was still dropping. Inside, something was changing. She couldn't have named it yet, but she could feel it. And for the first time in longer than she could easily remember feeling something. Something warm and possible, and terrifyingly real, did not make her want to brace for the blow that came after. That was the thing that scared her most. Not the cold, not the hard work, not the town that watched her with eyes like measuring cups. The fact that standing in this kitchen, in this house that was slowly coming back to life under her hands with that man's quiet laugh still warming the air between them, she was beginning against every instinct she had ever trained into herself to hope. Hope, Clara had learned a long time ago, was the most dangerous thing a person could carry. It was heavier than it looked. It took up more room than you planned for. And when it broke, and in her experience it always broke, the pieces were sharp enough to cut you in places you didn't even know you could bleed. So, she did what she always did when she felt it creeping in. She worked harder. The third week of January, Clara woke up at 4 a.m. because something in the sound of the wind had changed, and she lay still in her dark room for 30 seconds, listening to it before she understood what was wrong. The pitch was different, lower, steadier. Not the sharp, cutting gusts of a regular winter night, but the long, sustained pressure of a storm that had made up its mind. She was dressed and at the window before the thought was fully formed. She couldn't see more than 6 feet into the dark. That was enough. She went to the kitchen, built up the fire, put water on, and then crossed the yard to the forge in the pitch dark and the howling cold and hammered on the door 3 times. Ethan opened it 40 seconds later, already half awake. Hair not yet combed, expression sharp in the way that people who live alone learn to be sharp when something interrupts the night. "Blizzard," Clara said. "Coming from the northwest. We have maybe an hour before it's on top of us." He didn't question it. Didn't ask how she knew or whether she was sure. He just said, "Animals." "I'll start with the chickens," Clara said. "They need to come into the shed. The cow's all right if we get extra hay in. The horses need blankets and the water trough will freeze solid. We need to break it now and cover it, or they'll have nothing to drink until this breaks." "Grain," Ethan said. "If it runs long, we'll need extra grain in with the horses." "Shed south corner behind the broken crate," Clara said. She had catalogued every inch of that shed the first week. He stared at her for just a moment in the dark doorway. "Go," he said. They moved. They worked in the freezing dark side by side without talking more than necessary short functional sentences. Nothing wasted, and Clara felt the storm building at her back. The whole time felt the pressure of it, the way the air before a bad storm gets a quality to it that is almost like a held breath. The whole sky pulling back before it comes down. They got everything done in 51 minutes. By the time they came back inside and pulled off their outer layers, and Clara put coffee on, the snow was hitting the windows in hard, flat sheets, and the wind had jumped from sustained to savage in the span of 10 minutes. Ethan stood at the kitchen window with his coffee cup and watched the storm for a moment. "If it lasts 3 days," he said, "the Harlow boys won't be able to get out to their north pasture." "Their fence on the north side was already weak," Clara said. "I saw it when we were there." "If the drifts push through it, they could lose animals." "I know." He turned from the window. "I'll go over as soon as it breaks." "We'll go?" Clara said. He looked at her. She met his eyes over her coffee cup. "We'll go," he said. The blizzard lasted 2.5 days. During those 2.5 days, the house became something else. Clara had expected the confinement to be difficult. She was not by nature a person who sat still, and she had always found that too much time in a small space, with too little to do, was when the bad thoughts had the most room to get loud. But there turned out to be no shortage of things to do, even inside, even trapped. She patched every gap in the window frames properly using the supplies she had bought from Harriet. She resoled a pair of Ethan's work boots that had been splitting along the inner seam. She sorted his tools, the household ones, not the forge equipment, organized them, labeled the jars of nails and bolts and small hardware by size, and put everything back in a way that made sense. Ethan spent the first day doing forge work. He had been falling behind on small items. Things that didn't require the full heat at the small auxiliary anvil he kept inside the house for exactly this kind of weather. He worked at the kitchen table, and Clara worked around him, and they moved through the same space without getting in each other's way with the ease of people who had been doing it for years rather than 3 weeks. On the second day, the cold inside the house dropped enough that they ended up, by unspoken mutual decision, spending most of the day in the kitchen near the fire. And that was when Ethan Callahan started talking. Not about small things. Not about the farm or the animals or the list of repairs. He started talking the way people talk when the storm outside is loud enough to make the inside feel separate from the rest of the world, and that separateness makes things feel possible that normally don't. He talked about the forge, about how he had learned from his father and his father's father, how there was a language to iron that most people never learned to hear, how every metal had a different sound when you struck it, and if you really listened, you could tell more about the state of the piece from the ring of the hammer than from looking at it. Clara listened. She did not fill the silence between his sentences with her own words, the way she had seen people do, the way she had learned early that people in conversation did not always want a response so much as they wanted a witness. She listened, and she watched him as he talked, and she saw something happen in his face that she had not seen before. A loosening, some long-held tension releasing in increments, the way ice releases in a slow thaw, where you can't see it happening moment to moment, but you can see the difference between morning and afternoon. Then he went quiet for a while, and she thought that was all. But then he said her name was Anna. Clara did not move. She was from Pennsylvania, Ethan said. Came out here with her family when she was 16. I met her the winter I turned 22. He paused. She was the kind of person who made every room feel like it had more light in it than before she walked in. Clara kept her hands on the mending she was doing and said nothing. She died 3 years ago, Ethan said. It was fast, fever, 4 days. He looked at his hands. I was in the forge when she took bad. I thought it was just a cold. I thought... He stopped. I wasn't there when she went. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind screamed. Ethan, Clara said carefully. I don't want your sympathy, he said. Not harshly, just flatly. Like a man stating a boundary he had needed to state 100 times. I know, Clara said. I wasn't going to offer it. He looked at her. I was going to say that what happened to you wasn't your fault, she said. And I was going to say that once and then not say it again because I don't think you need to hear it more than once. You just need someone to say it out loud. He stared at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't name and didn't try to. She would have liked you, he said finally. Clara breathed very carefully. I don't know about that, she said. She liked people who were real, he said. She had no patience for pretense, any kind. He paused. She would have liked you. Clara looked down at the mending in her hands. The storm outside didn't let up. The fire inside held, and something that had been approaching for 3 weeks arrived quietly in that kitchen, without announcement, without ceremony, not love, yet, not anything with a name yet, but the precondition for it. The kind of knowing that comes before caring. The kind of seeing that has to happen before anything else can. The blizzard broke on the morning of the 3rd day. They were at the Harlow farm by mid-morning. The north fence had come down in 4 places, exactly as Clara had predicted, and 2 of the younger cattle had drifted through in the night and were found half a mile into the open field, cold and frightened, but alive. Clara and Nate's eldest son went out after them, while Ethan and Nate worked on the worst section of fence, and getting those animals back was 2 hours of hard work in knee-deep snow and a temperature that made her face ache. But they got them back, and when they came in from the cold, and Ruth Harlow had hot food and coffee waiting, she had been watching for them, had started cooking the moment she heard the horses, and the whole family sat around the table together. Clara felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt like she was somewhere she was supposed to be. She held on to that feeling carefully, the way you hold something you're afraid to break. Word about the blizzard recovery spread the way all news spread in Red Hollow fast and with additions. By the end of the week, people in town knew that Ethan Callahan's new housekeeper had predicted the storm. 2 hours before it hit, had secured the animals in the dark, had gone to the Harlows the moment the weather broke, and had personally gone out into the drifts after lost cattle. This produced two reactions. Some people were impressed. Dorothy Crane was not among them. Clara encountered Dorothy for the second time at the dry goods store on a Thursday morning, 10 days after the blizzard, when the snow had settled and the roads were passable again, and life in Red Hollow was trying to find its footing. She was at the counter with Harriet going through a new order when Dorothy came in with two other women whose names Clara still didn't know and whose faces she recognized from the platform on her first day. Dorothy did not acknowledge Clara. She walked to the far end of the counter, spoke to Harriet about something in a low voice, and then when Harriet had gone to the back to check on stock, turned to the woman beside her and said at full conversational volume, "I heard she's been going to every farm in the valley, ingratiating herself." Clara went still. "Nate Harlow practically worships her now, apparently," the second woman said. "Nate Harlow is easily impressed," Dorothy said. "He's a farmer. She fixed a fence. Anyone can fix a fence." "She predicted the blizzard, they say." "Anyone who watches the weather can predict a blizzard." Dorothy's voice was sharp and precise. "What concerns me is the manner of it. A woman in her position going from farm to farm, spending Ethan's money, and now spending time with him, closed up in that house for 3 days during the storm." "Dorothy," the second woman said low. "I'm simply saying what everyone is thinking," Dorothy said. "What exactly is her position in that house? Because it seems to me it's becoming something other than what was advertised." Clara set her pencil down on the counter. Slowly, she turned around. She looked at Dorothy Crane with that cool level expression and she said, "My position in that house, Mrs. Crane, is exactly what was agreed. I manage the household. I do the work. Mr. Callahan pays me a fair wage." She paused. "If what I do with my employment offends you, I'd genuinely like to understand why. Because from where I stand, what I've done since arriving in this town is help people who needed it. The Harlows, the Suttons, the families who couldn't get out during the storm." She took one step forward. "If that's something that concerns you, Mrs. Crane, I think the concern might be worth examining." The store was completely silent. Dorothy's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. "I beg your pardon," she said finally, and her voice was ice. "No need," Clara said pleasantly. "I'm just being clear." She turned back to the counter. Her hands were still. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her fingertips, but her hands were completely still and she kept them that way. Harriet came back from the storeroom, looked at the silence in the room, looked at Clara, looked at Dorothy, and set a bolt of cloth on the counter with a thud that was just slightly louder than necessary. "Found your order, Dorothy," she said in a voice that was professionally neutral but had an edge to it that Clara noted. "Did you want me to wrap it?" Dorothy said yes she did, and she spent the next 5 minutes completing her transaction without looking at Clara again, and when she left the bell above the door, hit the frame harder than it needed to. The two women who had come in with her left without buying anything. In the silence that followed, Harriet looked at Clara for a moment. Then she said very quietly, "I've been wanting someone to say that to that woman for approximately 15 years. Clara breathed out. "I probably shouldn't have," she said. "Probably not," Harriet agreed. "But I'm glad you did." The problem, as Clara discovered within 48 hours, was that Dorothy Crane did not forgive what she considered public humiliation. And Dorothy Crane had a husband who was the town's only attorney, which meant she had access to a particular kind of power that most people didn't. It started small. A rumor she couldn't trace the source, but she didn't need to, that Ethan was in financial trouble. That the reason he had hired a woman rather than managing on his own was that he couldn't afford to keep the forge running properly. That the Callahan property had liens on it that nobody knew about. It was not true. None of it was true. But in a small town, a well-placed rumor didn't need to be true. It just needed to get there before the truth did. Clara found out about it from May Sutton, who drove all the way out to tell her in person on a Tuesday morning, because May was the kind of woman who believed that the people she respected deserved to hear hard things face to face. "I want you to know because you should know," May said, sitting at Clara's kitchen table with her hands around a coffee cup. "I don't believe a word of it. Neither does Nate Harlow or Ruth or anyone with any sense. But it's going around." Clara's hands were flat on the table. "Does Ethan know?" she said. "I'd guess not yet," May said. "You know how men are, the last to hear the things said about them." Clara sat with this for a moment. Then she said, "May, does Ethan have financial trouble?" "Genuinely, do you know?" May looked at her steadily. "Not that I've ever heard. He's a good craftsman. He works hard. He's not a rich man, but he's a stable one." She paused. "Or he was before this." Clara nodded. "All right," she said. "What are you going to do?" May asked. "I'm going to find out where the rumor started," Clara said. "And then I'm going to find out what it's actually about. Because this isn't about me and Ethan. This is about something else, and I haven't found the bottom of it yet." May Sutton looked at her for a long moment. "You are not what I expected," she said. "Nobody ever is," Clara said. She told Ethan that night. She had debated it during the whole of the afternoon, whether to tell him, how to tell him, whether protecting him from it was kinder than being straight with him. But she had decided by the time he came in from the forge that she was not going to manage the truth on his behalf. He was a grown man. He deserved to know what was being said about his name and his business, so she told him, flatly, completely, everything May had said. She watched his face while she talked. She had expected anger. She had seen men respond to this kind of news with the particular fury of people who are used to being the ones who set the terms and don't expect the ground to be cut from under them. What she saw instead was something colder. Ethan Callahan went very, very still. "Richard Crane," he said. Clara stopped. "His name keeps coming up," Ethan said. "I've had 2 suppliers in the last month tell me they were contacted by someone asking about my accounts. I thought it was nothing. I thought it was—" He stopped. "There's a piece of land, south edge of my property. It touches the Harlow land on one side and the road on the other. It's worth something because of where it sits. I've had 2 offers on it in the last year. I turned them both down." Clara sat very still. "Who made the offers?" she said. Ethan's jaw tightened. "The second one came through Richard Crane's office," he said. The silence in the kitchen was different now. Not the comfortable quiet of 2 people who didn't need to fill the air. This was the silence of 2 people who had just understood something at the same time and were both sitting with the weight of it. "He's trying to make you look financially unstable," Clara said. "So you'll need to sell." "That's what I think," Ethan said. "And the timing, right when I've hired someone," Ethan said. "Added an expense to the household. Makes the story easier to sell." Clara breathed in slowly. "He's using me as part of it." "That's what I think," Ethan said again. She had been in Red Hollow for less than a month. She had arrived carrying 2 suitcases and a letter promising a new beginning. She had fixed a house, helped a town through a blizzard, made friends she hadn't expected to make, and stood up to a woman who had been unchallenged for 15 years. And now she was sitting in a warm kitchen she had made warm across from a man she had not expected to respect this much, and the ground was already shifting under her feet, in the way it always shifted, the way it had shifted in every town she had ever tried to put roots down in. The old voice in the back of her head said, "This is the part where you start planning to leave." Clara told it to be quiet. She folded her hands on the table. "Tell me everything you know about that piece of land," she said. Ethan looked at her across the table, at her steady hands. Her level eyes, the complete absence of panic in her face, and something moved in his expression that she would think about later alone in her room in the dark when the wind was quiet enough for thinking. "Why?" he said. "Because," Clara said, "whoever is behind this made one mistake." "What mistake?" Clara met his eyes. They assumed that because I'm here to cook and clean, I'm not paying attention to anything else. Ethan stared at her. Then he said very quietly, Clara, tell me about the land, Ethan. And he did. He talked for an hour. She listened to all of it, every boundary marker, every offer, every detail about the road access and the water rights that made that particular parcel valuable in ways that weren't obvious from a glance at the terrain. She asked questions. Specific, precise questions, the kind that came from a woman who had spent years watching powerful men operate and had paid attention to how they did it, even when they thought nobody like her was worth watching. By the time the fire burned low, she had a picture. Not complete, not yet, but enough to understand that what was happening to Ethan Callahan was not a personal grudge. It was a financial calculation. And financial calculations had paper behind them. Documents, transfers, filings, and paper could be read by anyone who knew where to look. I need to go to the county records office, Clara said. That's in Glenwood Springs, Ethan said. 2 days' ride. I know. The weather. I know, Clara said. He was quiet for a moment. I'll take you, he said. You don't have to. I'll take you, he said again. And there was that same steadiness in his voice that she had heard at the Harlow farm. The kind that wasn't a command, but wasn't a suggestion either. The kind that meant a decision had been made, and the making of it was not something he was going to revisit. Clara looked at him. All right, she said. They sat in silence for another moment. Then Ethan said, Why are you doing this, Clara? She considered the question honestly. Because someone is trying to take something from you, she said. And I don't like it when people take things from people who work for what they have. He waited like he knew there was more. She looked at the fire. And because this is the first place in a long time, she said very quietly, that I have felt like I was somewhere I was supposed to be, and I'm not ready to let someone take that from me either. The fire popped. Ethan said nothing for a long time. Then he reached across the table, not to touch her hand, just near it. His palm flat on the table 3 inches from hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off his skin, and he said, Then we won't let them. Clara looked at his hand. She looked at her own. She breathed. And somewhere in the cold dark outside Red Hollow, Colorado, Richard Crane sat in his office and counted his pieces on the board and was entirely confident that he was winning. He had not yet learned the one thing everyone in that town was just beginning to understand. Clara Whitmore did not lose. She just took longer to start fighting than people expected. They left for Glenwood Springs on a Wednesday before the sun was fully up. Clara had packed 2 days of food the night before, biscuits wrapped in cloth salt pork, dried apple, a small tin of coffee, and the means to make it. And she was already on the wagon seat when Ethan came out of the house with his coat and his hat, and both saddlebags, and he stopped when he saw her sitting there waiting, and something in his face shifted in the way it sometimes did. Now that particular expression she had started to recognize as a man catching himself being surprised by the same person repeatedly, and not quite knowing what to do with that. He climbed up beside her without comment. She handed him a biscuit. He took it. They drove. The road to Glenwood Springs was 2 days each way in winter, through terrain that did not forgive poor decisions or weak horses. And Clara spent the first 2 hours of the journey going back over everything Ethan had told her about the land. The offers, Richard Crane's involvement, turning it all over in her mind. The way she turned over every problem looking for the angle she hadn't examined yet. The piece that didn't fit the way the others fit. Water rights, Ethan had said. That was what made the south parcel valuable beyond its acreage. The creek that ran through the eastern edge of it fed 3 downstream properties. Whoever held that parcel held in practical terms the ability to control how much water those properties received. In a dry year, that was not a minor thing. In a very dry year, it was everything. Tell me about the other landowner, Clara said. The one whose property touches yours on the south side. Ethan was quiet for a moment, hands steady on the reins. Old man Prentice, he said. He's been there 30 years. Ranches cattle. He's got 70, maybe 80 acres on the other side of the creek. Does he know about Crane's interest in the parcel? I don't know. Would he talk to you if you asked? Ethan's jaw shifted. We haven't been on easy terms. There was a boundary dispute 4 years ago. Nothing went to court, but it left things stiff. Could you put that aside? Ethan glanced at her sideways. I'm not sure he could. What if it wasn't you who asked? Clara said. He looked at her more directly. What are you thinking? He said. I'm thinking, Clara said carefully, that Crane needs both parcels to make the water rights consolidation work. He can't control the creek flow with just your land. He needs Prentice too. She paused. Which means either Prentice has already agreed to sell, or Crane hasn't gotten to him yet, or Crane has already gotten to him and he doesn't know what he's agreed to. Ethan was quiet for long enough that Clara knew he was following the same thread she was. If Prentice doesn't know what Crane actually wants the land for, Ethan said slowly. Then he sold based on whatever story Crane told him, Clara said. And whatever story Crane told him was probably not the true one. The horses moved through the cold morning. We stop at Prentice's on the way back, Ethan said. Yes, Clara said. They reached the way station at midday, a rough-built stop that served as a rest point for the road between Red Hollow and Glenwood Springs, run by a couple whose names Clara never got because they communicated primarily through grunts and the placing of food on tables, which she found efficient and almost likable. She and Ethan ate at opposite ends of a long bench table in silence. Not their own comfortable silence, but the silence of two people surrounded by strangers who were watching them with the frank curiosity of people who had nothing else to look at, and then they were back on the road. The afternoon was colder than the morning. Clara pulled her coat tighter and moved her hands inside her sleeves and watched the terrain roll past and let herself think about things she had been not thinking about for days, because not thinking about them required effort, but was generally more efficient than thinking about them. She thought about the way Ethan had put his hand on the table 3 inches from hers the night they had sat talking about Richard Crane and the land, and how she had been thinking about those 3 inches with a frequency that was completely out of proportion to their significance. She thought about what Ruth Harlow had said. That took nerve, and the way she had not known what to do with that. She thought about the crate under Ethan's bed, with Anna's sewing things in it, the half-finished pillowcase, the folded calico, and the fact that she had not mentioned it to him and was not sure she ever would, because some things a person had to arrive at in their own time, and pushing was the surest way to make sure they never got there. She thought about hope and how she had told herself it was dangerous, and how she had gone right ahead and let it grow anyway, the way weeds grew through frozen ground, insistent and unreasonable and alive. She was still thinking about this when Ethan said, "There's something I need to say to you." Clara came back from her thoughts. "All right," she said. He kept his eyes on the road, his hands on the reins. His voice was careful in the way it got when he was saying something he had been building toward rather than something that came out naturally. "When I placed that advertisement," he said, "I was looking for someone to manage the house. That was all I was looking for. I was not—" He stopped, started again. "I had decided after Anna that I was finished with the part of life that involved needing people. That I would work, and I would keep the house going, and I would not ask anyone for anything more than what a business arrangement required." Clara said nothing. "You came," he said, "and you changed the house in the first week. And then you were at the forge with the coffee before I asked. And the Harlow farm, and the blizzard, and now this." He paused. "And I need you to know that I notice. All of it. I notice all of it, and I don't know exactly what to do with that." Clara looked at his profile. "You don't have to do anything with it," she said very quietly. "That's not—" He made a sound that wasn't quite frustration. "That's not what I mean." "Then what do you mean?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I mean," he said finally, "that I am grateful. And that grateful is not the right word, but it's the one I have. And I mean—" Another pause. Longer. "I mean that I don't want you to leave Red Hollow. At the end of whatever this is, however it ends. I don't want you to go." Clara felt something hit the center of her chest so hard she had to breathe carefully for a moment. "I'm not planning to go," she said. I know you're not planning to, he said. I'm not talking about plans. I'm talking about wanting. I wanted to say it out loud so you knew it was true. She looked at the road ahead. Her hands were folded in her lap, and they were not entirely steady. All right, she said. All right, he said. I heard you, she said. I heard you. He glanced at her. She kept her eyes forward. Good, he said. And he looked back at the road and they drove on, and the thing that had been said hung in the air between them, said now, and real now. And Clara sat with it, the way you sit with something precious and slightly terrifying, very carefully, making sure not to squeeze too hard. They made Glenwood Springs by evening and found a boarding house with 2 small rooms, and Clara spent the night staring at the ceiling above her narrow bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a different town and thinking about the words, I don't want you to go, in a voice that was low and careful and meant exactly what it said. The county records office opened at 8 in the morning. Clara was on the steps at 7:45. The clerk who opened the door was a young man of perhaps 22, who took one look at Clara, at her size, at her plain coat, at the total absence of anything in her expression that suggested she was there for any reason other than the one she was there for, and said uncertainly, Can I help you, ma'am? Land records? Clara said. Garfield County. I need to see everything filed in the last 2 years on parcels adjacent to the Callahan property in Red Hollow Township. The young man blinked. Ethan stepped up beside her. The young man looked at both of them and decided correctly that this was not a morning for hesitation. Right this way, he said. They spent 4 hours in that office. Clara read everything, every transfer, every filing, every note and every margin. She read with the focused, methodical attention she brought to every inventory, every repair, every problem she had ever been handed, and she made notes in her small, tight handwriting on the paper the clerk provided, and by the end of the 2nd hour, she had found what she was looking for. She just hadn't expected what it was. Ethan, she said. He looked up from the filing he was looking through on the other side of the table. She slid a document across to him. He read it. His face went very still. This was filed 8 months ago, he said. Yes. This is a water rights claim, he said. On the creek. Filed under a company name I don't recognize. Keep reading, Clara said. He read further. This company, he said slowly, has a registered agent listed as Robert Hargrove, Clara said. Attorney at law, Denver office. Ethan looked up. Crane doesn't do his own legal work, Clara said. He uses a Denver firm for anything he doesn't want connected directly to his name. I went through the incorporation records for that company this morning while you were with the deed transfers. She laid another page in front of him. That company was incorporated 14 months ago, 1 month after Crane first approached you about the south parcel. Ethan stared at the papers. He already filed the claim, he said. A preliminary one, Clara said. It doesn't hold unless he can demonstrate continuous possession or purchase, which he can't do yet because he doesn't own the land. But if he did own it, the claim would be strengthened significantly, Clara said. And if he also got Prentice to sell, he would control both banks of the creek at the key point, and the downstream argument becomes very difficult to fight. Ethan put both hands flat on the table. How long have you known how to read legal filings? He said. Since I was 23, Clara said. I had a landlord in Cincinnati who tried to evict me and 6 other women from a boarding house using a fraudulent lease transfer. We couldn't afford an attorney. She paused. I went to the records office myself. What happened? Ethan said. We kept our rooms, Clara said. And he lost his license to operate for 2 years. Ethan stared at her. Clara, he said. We're not done, she said. There's more. There was more. There was a great deal more. The deed transfers showed a pattern that went back further than Ethan had known. Crane had been quietly buying parcels throughout the Southern Valley for 6 years. Never enough in one transaction to raise attention, always through different agents, always with a surface reason that had nothing to do with the real one. A legacy investment here, an estate settlement there. Small pieces. Patient moves. Clara mapped it out on paper while the clerk brought more files. When she was done, she had a picture that covered most of the table, and when Ethan looked at it, at the shape of what Crane had been assembling parcel by parcel over 6 quiet years, she watched the color leave his face. "He's not just trying to buy the south parcel," Ethan said. "No," Clara said. "He's trying to control the entire water access for the lower valley. Every farm downstream of the creek junction," Clara said. 12 properties, possibly more if the dry years come back. Ethan looked at the map. "The Harlows are on this list," he said. "Yes." "The Suttons." "Yes." "Everyone." "Almost," Clara said. "The ones he hasn't reached yet are the ones with less productive land. He'll get to them eventually if he gets the key parcels first." Ethan pushed back from the table and stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her, and she let him stand there because she understood that what he was processing wasn't just the legal picture. It was the picture of 6 years during which he had lived his life. Worked his forge, grieved his wife, and fought his loneliness, all while someone had been quietly drawing a net around everything he and his neighbors had built. After a moment, he said without turning around, "What do we do?" Clara looked at her notes. "First," she said, "we get copies of everything relevant, certified copies stamped by the county so they can't be disputed." She was already writing the request for the clerk. "Second, we go to Prentice on the way home. If he hasn't sold yet, he needs to know what he'd be selling into. If he already has sold, we need to know the terms and whether there's anything fraudulent in them that could be challenged. And if there is, then we find someone who can challenge it," Clara said. "Not Crane's attorney, and not someone Crane can reach. Someone from outside the county." Ethan turned from the window. "That costs money," he said. "I know," Clara said. "I've been thinking about that." "And," Clara set her pencil down, "May Sutton," she said. "The Harlows. The other families on this list. This isn't just your fight, Ethan. It's theirs. If they understand what Crane is actually doing, what it means for their water access in a dry year, they have as much reason as you do to stand against it." She paused. 12 families sharing the cost of one good attorney from Denver is not an impossible number. He looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to ask them," he said, not a question. "I'm going to tell them the truth," Clara said. "What they decide to do with it is up to them." The clerk came back with the copy request form, and Clara filled it out in her small, precise handwriting. And they waited 40 minutes for the certified copies, and then they were back on the road. The papers secured in the saddlebag, and Clara sat on the wagon seat with her hands folded and felt the particular exhaustion that came from using her mind hard for 4 consecutive hours. Ethan reached over without looking at her and tucked the edge of the blanket more firmly around her side. She looked at his hand. He looked at the road. Neither of them said anything. They stopped for the night at the same way station, and this time Clara ate everything on her plate and drank 2 cups of coffee and felt the warmth come back into her fingers, and across the table, Ethan watched her in that way he had not. Staring, not making her feel observed, just present attentive there. "How are you?" he said. "Tired," she said honestly. "You found what you went for," he said. "More than you went for." "More than I expected," she agreed. "Does that—" He stopped. "Does it change anything for you, being here?" She understood what he was asking. He was asking whether knowing that Red Hollow had this underneath it. The ugliness, the greed. The 6 years of patient scheming changed the way she saw the place, whether it made her want to leave before she had ever really arrived. She thought about it. She thought about Ruth Harlow's laugh in the cold barn. May Sutton's peach preserves. Harriet Osgood carrying a crate to her wagon without being asked. The boy at the Harlow farm who had been afraid and had his fear given somewhere to go. She thought about a warm kitchen and a low fire, and a man who said, "I don't want you to go," in a voice that meant it. "No," she said. "It doesn't change anything." Ethan nodded slowly. "Good," he said. And he meant it the same way he meant everything directly without decoration, the way a man who has learned that ornament is usually a way of hiding. The truth keeps everything stripped back to what's actually there. They reached the Prentice property mid-morning the next day on the road back toward Red Hollow. Clara had wondered what Prentice would be like. She had only Ethan's description, which was spare, and the suggestion of bad blood over the boundary dispute 4 years ago, which she suspected had been more about pride than property. He turned out to be a man in his late 60s, with a face like a topographic map, every hard year written clearly in it, and eyes that were sharp and assessing and not particularly welcoming. He came out to the fence when he saw the wagon. He looked at Ethan. "Callahan," he said. "Prentice," Ethan said. A pause that had several years of unresolved stiffness packed into it. Then Clara said from the wagon seat, "Mr. Prentice, my name is Clara Whitmore. I manage Mr. Callahan's household." She paused just a beat. "I wonder if we could take 20 minutes of your time. There's something you need to know about a transaction that may have been proposed to you recently. It concerns your property and mine, and the creek that runs between them and the man who's been making offers on both." Prentice looked at her. He had the same expression most people got when they first looked at Clara, taking inventory, forming a conclusion, but what happened next was not what usually happened next, because Prentice was a man who had been farming the same land for 30 years, and who had in that time developed a certain ability to read people based on very little information. What he read in Clara's face apparently was enough. "Come in," he said. "I'll put coffee on." They sat in Prentice's kitchen for an hour and 15 minutes. Clara laid out everything she had found at the county records office. The water rights filing, the corporate structure, the pattern of land acquisition, and she did it the way she did everything methodically without drama, fact by fact. She showed him the certified copies. Prentice sat across the table and read everything she put in front of him. His face, already not a cheerful face, got progressively less cheerful as he read. When he was done, he set the last page down and was quiet for a full 30 seconds. Then he said, "The offer I got was through a man named Hargrove." Clara kept her expression neutral. "Denver attorney." "That's the one." Prentice's voice was flat and cold. He said he was representing an investment group looking to develop cattle range. Said the water access was incidental to the deal. "And the price," Clara said. Prentice named a number. Ethan's jaw tightened. Clara caught it from the corner of her eye. "That's less than the market value of the land," Clara said carefully, "by approximately a third. Possibly more given the water access." Prentice stared at her. "They told me the market was soft," he said. "It isn't," Clara said. The silence that followed was the silence of a man understanding that he had been lied to. It was a particular kind of silence, dense, and with a heat underneath it. "I haven't signed anything yet," Prentice said. Clara exhaled. "Good," she said. "I was going to this week," he said. "Please don't," Clara said. "Not until you've had an attorney of your own choosing look at the actual terms. Not Crane's man, and not anyone Crane can reach." She paused. "We're going to be speaking to an attorney from outside the county. If you want to be part of that conversation, I believe you should be." Prentice looked at Ethan. The two men had a complicated history, and it sat between them in that kitchen like something neither of them had put down yet. Then Prentice said, "That boundary dispute, I handled it badly." Ethan said nothing for a moment. "So did I," he said. Something released. Not everything, not 4 years of stiffness in 20 seconds, but enough. Enough to reach across. "All right," Prentice said. "Tell me what you need." They drove back to Red Hollow in the early afternoon, the sky low and gray and promising snow later, and Clara sat beside Ethan on the wagon with the saddlebag of certified documents at her feet and felt the shape of what was coming. Not just the legal fight, which would be hard, but the conversation she needed to have with every family on that list, and the attorney she needed to find, and the way Crane would respond when he realized what she had done. He would not respond quietly. Men like Richard Crane never did. He's going to know, Clara said. Yes, Ethan said. When he finds out we've been to the county records and to Prentice, he'll move faster, Ethan said. Try to lock things down before we can organize. That's what I think too, Clara said. How much time do we have? Clara calculated. If Prentice holds, and I believe he will, Crane can't complete the water rights consolidation without the key parcels, which means he needs to either accelerate the purchase strategy or shift tactics. She paused. I think he'll try something against you directly, something that looks unrelated to the land. The rumor wasn't enough, Ethan said. No, he'll escalate. She thought about it. The forge, your accounts, something that creates visible public pressure. Ethan drove in silence for a moment. You know what the worst part of all this is, he said. What? I've lived next to this man for 15 years, Ethan said. I've shot his horses. I've repaired his fence posts. I thought I knew him. He paused. I thought this was a community. Clara understood. That was the wound underneath the wound, not just the legal threat, but the discovery that something he had believed was real had not been what it appeared. That a man he had counted as if not a friend, then a known quantity, a neighbor, a person operating within the same understood set of rules, had been doing something entirely different underneath the surface of ordinary life. The community is real, Clara said. The Harlows are real. May Sutton is real. Harriet Osgood is real. She paused. Prentice is real, I think, underneath the stiff. Ethan's mouth moved, almost a smile. Most of it is real, Clara said. Crane is the exception, not the rule. You sound sure of that, Ethan said. I've been in enough places, Clara said, to know the difference between a place where the rot goes all the way through and a place where one bad thing is pretending to be the whole. This town is the second kind. He looked at her. You've thought about staying, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, she said, even with this. Especially with this, she said. I don't stay in places that don't need anything. I stay in places where there's something to do. Ethan turned back to the road. After a moment he said, Clara, when this is resolved however it resolves, I want to talk to you about something. Her hands folded in her lap went very still. All right, she said. Not now, he said. When it's done. When we're through the other side of it. I want to have that conversation then, not in the middle of all this. She understood what he meant. She also understood what he was saying underneath what he meant. All right, she said again. They rode in silence. But the silence was different now. It had a new weight to it, a new texture, the particular quality of silence between two people who have both said something they meant and are both sitting with the fact that it was said. They reached Red Hollow in the late afternoon. The first person Clara saw when they drove through the main street was Dorothy Crane. Dorothy was on the opposite side of the road outside the milliner's shop, and she saw the wagon coming, and she stopped, and her eyes went to the saddlebag at Clara's feet, and then to Clara's face. And something in Dorothy's expression, some flicker of calculation, told Clara that Dorothy already knew they had been to Glenwood Springs. News traveled fast in a small town. Even faster, apparently, when someone was paying attention to the direction it traveled. Clara met Dorothy's eyes from across the road. She did not look away. Dorothy turned and went into the milliner's without a word. Ethan noticed. She knows, he said quietly. Her husband will know by tonight, Clara said. Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. Then we move tomorrow, Clara said. May Sutton first. She'll know who to call together and how to do it without it looking like we're organizing. Which is important because if Crane sees the organization coming, he'll try to discredit it before it starts. And the attorney. I need Harriet, Clara said. She's been here long enough to know who practices outside the county and who can be trusted. You trust Harriet. She carried a crate to my wagon on the first day, Clara said. Yes. Ethan pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake, and they both climbed down, and when Clara reached for the saddlebag, he was already holding it. She looked at him. He looked at her. Something was in his face that she did not allow herself to name, because they were in the middle of a street, and she was a practical woman, and the time for naming things was later, when it was done, when they were through the other side of it. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make supper. We need to plan tomorrow." He followed her up the porch steps, the solid porch steps, the ones she had watched him repair the first week, the ones that didn't give anymore, and she pushed open the front door that no longer stuck, and the warmth of the house that she had made warm met them both. She put the kettle on, she got out the food, she started planning, and across the small town of Red Hollow, Colorado, Richard Crane sat in his office and received a piece of information that changed the entire shape of the game he thought he was winning. And for the first time in 6 years of careful, patient, meticulous work, he felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Uncertainty. The fat woman from the train he had thought when he first heard about her. The woman everyone laughed at on the platform. The woman he had used without even thinking about it, factoring her into his narrative as a tool. Evidence that Callahan was spending beyond his means. She had been to the county records office. She had certified copies. She had talked to Prentice. Richard Crane stood up from his desk and walked to the window and looked out at the street of the town he had been quietly buying piece by piece for 6 years. He needed to end this, quickly, before she could talk to anyone else. He reached for his coat. He had a plan. It was not a kind plan. But men like Richard Crane had not built what they built by being kind. And in the kitchen at the edge of Red Hollow, Clara Whitmore spread her notes across the table and picked up her pencil and started writing, and did not know yet what was coming. But she was ready anyway. She was always ready. It was the one thing nobody in this town had understood about her yet. And it was the one thing Richard Crane was about to learn. Richard Crane moved fast. Faster than Clara had expected, which told her everything she needed to know about how rattled he was. By the time she sat down at May Sutton's kitchen table the next morning with her notes and her certified copies and her carefully organized list of every parcel on that map, word had already come ahead of her. Not from May. From the town itself, from the particular way news traveled in Red Hollow, when someone with influence wanted it to travel in a specific direction. May opened the door before Clara could knock. "I heard something this morning," May said immediately. "From Tom Briggs at the feed store. He said Ethan Callahan is behind on his forged taxes, that he's been operating on borrowed accounts for 2 years, that the county is considering action against the property." Clara looked at her steadily. "None of that is true," she said. "I know it isn't," May said. "I also know who started it. Come in." The kitchen smelled like coffee and biscuits, and the particular warmth of a house where someone had been up since before dawn worrying. May's husband was out on the property she had sent him deliberately, Clara suspected, so they could talk freely. May poured 2 cups and sat down and looked at Clara with eyes that were sharp and ready. "Tell me everything," May said. Clara told her. All of it. The water rights filing, the corporate structure, the 6 years of patient acquisition, Prentice, the certified documents, the shape of what Crane was building and what it meant for every downstream property in the valley. May listened without interrupting once. When Clara finished, May was quiet for a full minute. Then she said, "My well ran dry in the summer of 1879. We had 2 months where we couldn't have made it without that creek." She paused. "My youngest was 3 years old." "I know," Clara said quietly. "If someone controlled that water." "They would control whether you stayed or left," Clara said. "Whether you had a choice about selling or didn't." May pressed both hands flat on the table. "Who do we need?" she said. "I need you to get the families together," Clara said. "Not at the church somewhere. Crane's people won't see the wagons. Your barn is big enough. Tomorrow evening, if you can manage it." "I can manage it," May said. "Who else?" "Harriet Osgood," Clara said. "I need her for the attorney contact. She knows people outside the county." "Harriet's already on your side," May said. "She told me what happened at the store with Dorothy Crane. She told everyone." A pause. "You didn't know that?" Clara blinked. "No," she said. "Half the women in this town have been waiting 15 years for someone to say that to Dorothy Crane," May said. "When they heard what you said, they—" She stopped, looked at Clara with an expression that was complicated and warm at the same time. "You don't know what you did when you came here, do you?" Clara didn't know what to say to that. "I've just been doing my job," she said. "That's what I mean," May said. They spent another hour at that table, and when Clara left, she had a plan that was real and a meeting set for the following evening, and May Sutton's full and unconditional confidence, which she was beginning to understand, was worth considerably more than it might appear. She went to Harriet next. Harriet Osgood listened to what Clara needed, asked 4 precise questions, and then reached under her counter and pulled out a ledger that appeared to be a personal address book and ran her finger down a column of entries. "Marcus Webb," she said. "He practices in Denver. Family connection to the Telluride mining interests. He's dealt with exactly this kind of water rights manipulation before on a larger scale. He's honest, he's expensive, and he wins." She looked up. "I'll write to him today." "Today," Clara said. "Not tomorrow." "I said today," Harriet said with a look that suggested she did not need to be told things twice. "I know," Clara said. "I'm sorry. You're scared," Harriet said. Not unkindly, just plainly. Clara opened her mouth and then closed it. "Yes," she said. "Good," Harriet said. "Scared people pay attention. Comfortable people miss things." Clara left the store feeling the particular kind of tired that came from doing necessary things under pressure. Not the exhaustion of wasted effort, but the spent feeling of effort that had actually gone somewhere. The trouble was waiting for her at home. She knew it the moment she came through the gate because Ethan was standing on the porch in the middle of the afternoon when he should have been at the forge, and his posture was the specific kind of still that people went into when they were containing something large. She came up the porch steps. "What happened?" she said. "Sheriff Alderman came by," he said. Clara stopped. "He came to tell me," Ethan said, and his voice was very controlled, "that a complaint has been filed against me, with the county assessor, alleging that I have been misrepresenting the productive capacity of the forge and the property in my tax filings for the past 3 years. The cold air between them felt different suddenly. "Who filed it?" Clara said, though she already knew. "Filed anonymously," Ethan said, "which in this county means filed by someone who knows the sheriff won't push on it." "Crane," Clara said. "Has to be." Ethan's jaw was tight. "Alderman is a decent man. He told me privately he thinks it's thin. But he said if the county assessor picks it up, and Crane has a friend on the assessor's board, it could mean an audit. Which means my accounts get examined. Which means anyone who hears about it assumes the rumors are true." Clara sat down on the porch step. She sat there for a moment and thought. "He's accelerating because he knows we have the documents," she said. "He wants to discredit you and me before the meeting tomorrow night. If he can make people believe you're financially compromised, they'll wonder whether our information is motivated by something other than their interest." "Can he do that?" Ethan said. "He can try," Clara said. "Whether he succeeds depends on how fast we move and how well people know us by now." Ethan crouched down to her level. He was close enough that she could see the exact shade of his eyes, which were the particular gray-brown of creek water in winter, and the particular set of his face when he was worried but not defeated, which she had come to know so well in 6 weeks that she could read it in dim light. "Clara," he said, "I need you to know something." She looked at him. "Whatever happens with the land," he said, "whatever happens with Crane and the assessor and all of it, my concern is not the property." "I know," she said. "My concern is you," he said. "If this gets harder, if Crane makes it personal, which he will if he goes after your reputation the way he went after mine. Ethan," she said, "I need you to know that I will not—" "Ethan," she said it firmly this time, not hard, firm. "Look at me." He looked at her. "I am not a woman who breaks," she said. "I need you to know that. Whatever he throws, whatever the town says, whatever the worst version of this looks like, I don't break." She paused. "What I need from you is not protection. What I need from you is exactly what you have been giving me since the first day. You stay steady, you trust me, and you let me do what I came here to do." He was very close. The porch was cold and the afternoon light was thin, and everything about this moment was unglamorous and real. "What you came here to do was manage my house," he said, and there was a thread of something almost like warmth under the words. "I came here to work," she said, "and the work got bigger than we planned. That's all." He looked at her for another moment. Then he stood up and held out his hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet, and he held her hand for exactly 2 seconds longer than necessary before releasing it, and she looked at the front door and nodded him and said, "Come inside. I need to prepare for tomorrow." The meeting at May Sutton's barn the following evening brought 11 families. Clara had not expected 11. She had hoped for 7. 11 meant that word had traveled faster than Crane's counter-narrative, which meant people trusted what they had heard about her more than they trusted what they had heard about Ethan's supposed financial trouble. She stood in that barn with her certified copies and her hand-drawn map, and she told the truth. She told it plainly. She didn't embellish, and she didn't soften. She showed them the water rights filing. She showed them the corporate structure. She showed them the pattern of acquisition parcel by parcel and what it would mean for their properties in a dry year. She watched the faces around her change as she spoke. Ruth Harlow's hand went to her mouth. Nate Harlow stood up straighter and went very quiet in the way of a man who is getting angry slowly and intends to stay angry. Prentice, who had come without being asked, just confirmed by Clara's presence to be invited, sat in the back with his arms crossed, and his expression making it clear that he had already done his own processing of this information and had arrived somewhere hard and decided. There were questions. Good questions. Careful questions. The questions of people who worked the land and understood risk and were not going to be moved by emotion alone. Clara answered every one of them. When she didn't know, she said she didn't know. When she had a document that spoke to it, she showed it. At the end, Nate Harlow said, "What do we need to do?" "I need a commitment from every family represented here," Clara said, "to hold on any approach from Crane or his agents until we have heard from the attorney in Denver. I need nobody to sign anything, agree to anything, or confirm anything for the next 3 weeks." 3 weeks? Someone said. "What if he pushes harder before then?" "He will push harder," Clara said. "I want you to expect that. Whatever he says, whatever story gets started, remember what's in these documents. The documents don't change." A woman near the back, older, someone Clara didn't know yet, raised her hand. "Who are you?" the woman said. Not rudely, genuinely. "You've been here 6 weeks. Why should we trust you with this?" The barn went quiet. Clara looked at the woman. "You shouldn't trust me because of what I say," Clara said. "You should trust me because of what the documents say. I didn't write those filings. Richard Crane did. I just read them." She paused. "If you want to verify everything I've shown you tonight, go to Glenwood Springs yourself and read the county records. I'll write down exactly what to ask for." The woman looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Fair enough," she said. They stayed for another hour. Coffee was made and passed around, and conversations happened in the corners and between neighbors, and Clara moved through the barn, answering questions one by one. And by the time the lanterns were burning low and people were putting on their coats, something had shifted in the room that she recognized, and that she had not let herself hope for too soon. It was solidarity. Real solidarity. Not the performance of it, not the social agreement that things should be different, but the actual committed kind people who had looked at the same facts and reached the same conclusion and were willing to act on it together. On the ride home, Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You were extraordinary in there." Clara felt heat come into her face that had nothing to do with embarrassment. "I was clear," she said. "That's not extraordinary. That's just preparation." "Clara," he said. "Stop doing that." She looked at him. "Stop making yourself smaller than you are," he said. "Just stop." She looked at the road ahead. "It's a habit," she said. "I know," he said. "Break it." She breathed. She didn't answer. But something in her chest shifted some old compensatory reflex that had spent 29 years making her smaller so other people would be more comfortable, and for the first time she felt it not as a protection, but as a cage. A cage she had built herself, bar by bar, out of every laugh and every sideways look, and every time she had made herself quieter and less so, that the room would find her easier to accept. She was so tired of that cage. They were home within the half hour, and as Ethan unhitched the horses and she went inside to bank the fire, she stood in the kitchen for a moment in the quiet and the warmth, and she let herself feel the full weight of what the last 6 weeks had been. She had arrived with nothing she hadn't brought herself. She had built a home out of a cold house. She had found allies in a town that had laughed at her on the platform. She had uncovered a 6-year scheme to defraud 11 families, and she had done all of it while being told in ways small and large that she was the wrong kind of woman for any of it. She put the kettle on. Crane's next move came 4 days later. It came not through the sheriff or the county assessor or any of the official channels he had been working. It came through Dorothy. Dorothy Crane came to the house. She knocked on the front door at 10 in the morning, while Ethan was at the forge, and when Clara opened it, Dorothy was standing on the porch with an expression that Clara had never seen on her face before. Not the cool authority, not the calculated disdain. Something that looked unexpectedly like discomfort. "Mrs. Crane," Clara said. "May I come in?" Dorothy said. Clara stepped back and let her in. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Clara had spread her notes and planned and worked through every stage of what was happening, and Dorothy sat across from her with her hands folded and did not speak immediately. Clara waited. "My husband," Dorothy said finally, "is not a good man." Clara kept her expression neutral. "I have known this for some time," Dorothy said. "Longer than I should have allowed. Longer than any woman should allow something like that." She paused. "I am not here because I have suddenly become someone different. I want you to know that. I know what I have said about you. I know how I behaved. I am not under the illusion that an apology repairs that." "Then why are you here?" Clara said. Dorothy looked at her directly. "Because he is going to try to have you removed," she said. "He has spoken to 2 members of the county social board about what he is calling an improper living arrangement between you and Ethan Callahan. He is going to argue that you should not be permitted to remain in that house unchaperoned." She paused. "In this county in the year 1884, that argument has enough surface respectability to get traction, especially when it comes from a man with his connections." The kitchen was very quiet. Clara's hands were flat on the table. "He's not going after the land anymore," she said. "He's going after me." "He thinks if you leave the whole thing falls apart," Dorothy said. "He thinks the families will scatter without someone holding the center." "He might be right," Clara said honestly. "He is not right," Dorothy said, and there was a sharpness to it that Clara hadn't expected. "He has spent 30 years underestimating people because they were inconvenient to him, and he is doing it again." She looked at Clara. "You are the most capable person who has come to this town in 20 years. Every person who has worked alongside you knows it. He is a fool if he thinks removing you solves his problem." Clara stared at her. Dorothy Crane, who had called her unsuitable on a train platform, and implied worse in a general store, was sitting in her kitchen, telling her she was capable. "Why are you doing this?" Clara said. Dorothy's composure slipped just slightly, just for a second. "Because I am tired," she said quietly, "of being his instrument." She straightened. "I thought you deserved to know what was coming." She stood up. She picked up her coat. At the door she paused without turning around. "You were right," she said. "What you said at the store, about examining the concern." A beat. "I have been examining it." She left. Clara sat at the table alone for 60 seconds. Then she got up and went to the forge. She told Ethan everything Dorothy had said, standing in the heat of the forge, while he set down his hammer and listened with his whole attention. When she finished, he said, "He's going to move on this fast." "Before the attorney responds from Denver," Clara said, "that's the window he's working in." "What do we do?" Clara had been thinking about this for the 60 seconds and the 3 minutes walk to the forge. "We get married," she said. The forge was very loud with the fire. Then it was very quiet because Ethan had stopped doing everything. He looked at her. She looked at him. "That is a practical solution to the legal problem," she said, and her voice was steady. "And I want to be clear that I am saying it for practical reasons as much as for other reasons. If we are married, the argument about impropriety disappears. He cannot use the social board. He loses that entire line of attack." Ethan looked at her for a long time. "Clara," he said. "You don't have to," she started. "Clara," he said again, and his voice was something she had never heard in it before. Not the steadiness, not the control, but the thing underneath all of that, the thing he kept banked and contained, the way the forge kept its heat banked at night. "I told you on the road to Glenwood Springs that I wanted you to stay. I told you when this was done, I wanted to have a conversation." "I know," she said. "This is not the conversation I had planned," he said. "I know that too," she said. "But we don't have time for the conversation you planned." He took 3 steps toward her. He was close enough now that she had to look up at him, and she held his gaze because she was not a woman who looked away from things. "If we do this," he said carefully, "I need you to know that it is not temporary. It is not strategic. If we do this, it is real. It is for everything. It is—" He stopped. "I am not a man who does things halfway. Whatever I commit to, I keep. And if I stand in front of a minister with you, I will keep that. Every day, for the rest of my life." He paused. "I need to know you understand that." Clara breathed. "I understand that," she said. "And I need to know," he said quieter now, "that you want it. Not just the solution. That you want this, me, the forge and the cold winters and the town that laughed at you and all of it." She looked at him. She thought about 39 different things very fast. The cold room and the thin mattress and the frozen pantry and the porch plank and the Harlow barn and the blizzard and the county records and 3 inches of space between 2 hands on a table and the way he had said, "I don't want you to go with no ornamentation at all." She thought about the cage she had been living in. She thought about how for 6 weeks she had not felt it once. "Ethan," she said, "I am 39 years old. I have survived things that would have broken most people. I have worked harder than anyone in any room I have ever been in and been told repeatedly that it wasn't enough because of what I looked like. I have learned to want very little because wanting things is how you get hurt." She stopped, took a breath. "And then I came to this town, and I fixed your porch and your pantry and your windows, and somewhere in all of that, I started wanting things again, and I have been terrifying myself about it for 6 weeks." She looked at him directly. "Yes, I want this. I want you. I want the forge and the cold winters and the town that is currently learning it was wrong about me. I want all of it." His hand came up and touched her face just briefly, just the back of his fingers against her cheek, and it was the most careful, most deliberate, most certain gesture she had ever felt. "Then we'll go to Reverend Mills today," he said. "Today," she said. "Before Crane moves," he said. "And because we want to," she said. "Yes," he said. "And because we want to." They were married that afternoon. Reverend Mills was startled, and then not startled, and then quietly moved in the way that decent people are moved by things that are real, and Harriet Osgood appeared from nowhere to serve as witness. Clara would later learn that Harriet had somehow known that May Sutton had somehow known that this was Red Hollow's version of a secret, which meant 12 people knew about it, and all of them were glad. It was not a grand wedding. There were no flowers and no fine dress and no celebration dinner. There was a small church and 2 witnesses and a man who said his vows with the same directness he brought to everything. Looking at her the whole time, not at the Reverend, not at the window at her. And Clara said hers with the same steadiness, and felt for the first time in a very long time that she was standing in exactly the right place. Ethan Crane learned about the marriage the same evening. Whatever he had planned for the morning did not happen. The letter from Marcus Webb arrived 8 days later. Webb had received Harriet's letter and the copied documents she had sent along with it, and his response was 3 pages long and precise, and contained the phrase, "prima facie evidence of fraudulent misrepresentation" twice, and the phrase "actionable under Colorado Territorial Statute" 4 times. He would come to Red Hollow in 2 weeks. He came. He was a small, neat man of 50 who wore city clothes and spoke with the economy of someone who charged by the word and had learned that the most effective sentences were the shortest ones. And he sat in Clara and Ethan's kitchen, their kitchen, and reviewed every document Clara had assembled and asked questions for 2 hours, and at the end of it said, "This is a strong case, possibly very strong. I will need depositions from the property owners, and I will need a surveyor's assessment of the water impact. Both are manageable." "What about Crane?" Ethan said. "Crane will settle," Webb said. "Men like Crane always settle when they understand that the alternative is a public record of what they've done. The filing alone will frighten him." He looked at Clara. "The record-keeping here is exceptional. Whoever organized this made my job considerably easier." Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at her coffee cup. "It needed doing," she said. Webb filed the preliminary challenge 4 weeks later. Richard Crane's attorney responded within the week. And 6 weeks after that, on a Tuesday morning in late April, when the snow was finally off the ground and the first green was coming up through the brown of the winter fields, Ethan came in from the forge at midday, holding a letter, and set it on the table in front of Clara without speaking. She read it. Then she read it again. Crane had withdrawn the water rights filing. He had withdrawn the tax complaint against Ethan. He had, according to a separate communication from Webb, filed the same day, agreed to a settlement with the 11 families that acknowledged his acquisition. Strategy had misrepresented the nature of the water rights to multiple sellers and agreed to resale options at fair market value for any parcel acquired below valuation. It was not everything. It was not criminal prosecution, and it was not public humiliation, and it was not the full reckoning that some of the families felt was owed. But it was enough. The land was safe. The water was safe. The properties downstream were safe. Clara set the letter down. She pressed both hands flat on the table and breathed. Ethan sat down across from her. They looked at each other across the kitchen table, across the table she had organized and cleaned and worked at through the long winter, across the space that had been on a January morning 6 months ago, just a cold house with an empty pantry and a man who had forgotten that a home was supposed to be lived in. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she said. The silence that followed was the warmth kind, the kind she had come to know as the specific quality of peace between two people who had been through something real together and come out the other side and didn't need to fill the space between them to know they were both in it. Outside, she could hear the first birds. Spring in the valley was something she had not seen yet. She had arrived in the iron of January and had survived the blizzard and the cold and the long dark mornings, and she had not yet seen what this place looked like when it opened up. She was looking forward to it. "Nate Harlow is bringing his family on Saturday," she said. "May is coming Sunday. I told Harriet about the Sunday, and she said she might bring her husband." "This house will be full," Ethan said. "Yes," Clara said. He smiled. A real one, the kind she had been collecting since that first night in the kitchen when she had turned her face away so he wouldn't see her smile back. The kind that changed his whole face, made him look younger, made him look like a man who had been given back something he thought was gone for good. "Clara," he said. "Hmm?" she said. "You know what you did?" he said. Not a question. Serious and warm at the same time. She looked at him. "You came here with 2 suitcases," he said. "And you built all of this." She looked around the kitchen, at the organized shelves, at the pantry that was full, at the windows that didn't let the cold in anymore, at the house that breathed and held warmth and knew it was lived in. She looked at her husband across the table. She thought about the woman who had stepped off that train in January, hearing laughter and choosing not to stop walking. She thought about everything that woman had carried in those two worn suitcases. Not just the practical things, not just the skills and the tools and the hard-won knowledge, but the other things. The stubborn hope. The refusal to believe she was less than what she knew herself to be. The years of surviving without softness that had somehow, instead of hollowing her out, made her more completely herself. That woman had arrived in Red Hollow with almost nothing. And she had built a home. She had built trust. She had built a community of 11 families who now understood what they were to each other, and what they owed each other, and what they were capable of when someone showed them the shape of it. She had built a marriage out of honesty and work, and the particular courage of two people willing to be exactly who they were with each other. She had built herself a place where she belonged, not because anyone had given it to her, not because anyone had finally decided she was acceptable enough to include, because she had come to this town with her hands open and her eyes clear and her will intact, and she had done the work, day after day, problem after problem, without waiting for permission or approval, or the validation of people who didn't know her worth and couldn't be trusted to assess it. Clara Whitmore had stepped off a train into a crowd of laughing strangers, and she had outlasted every single one of them. "I came here to work," she said to her husband, across their kitchen table, with the spring birds loud in the warming air outside. Everything else followed. Ethan looked at her with those Winter Creek eyes. "Not everything," he said. Some of it I think was always here, waiting." She looked at him. She let herself feel it, the full warm weight of it, without bracing, without the old reflex that reached for the armor when something good got too close. She let it in. "Yes," she said. "I think you might be right." And in the house at the edge of Red Hollow, Colorado, on an April morning in 1884, with the snow finally gone, and the land waking up, and 11 families safe on their properties, and the sound of a forge starting up behind the house, Clara Callahan, who had arrived as Clara Whitmore, unwanted and laughed at and written off before she had spoken a single word, sat in her kitchen with her coffee and her husband and the life she had built from nothing. And she was exactly, completely, unreservedly where she was supposed to be. Not because the world had finally made room for her. Because she had never once, not for a single day of her life, stopped taking up her own,